Hello everyone, welcome to my channel German Talks, and I hope you're doing safe and excellent as always. Today, I have with me Professor Tim Cummins. Tim is president and founder of IACCM, now WCC, the world's leading association for research and training in commerce and contracting. He's also a professor of commercial and contract management at the University of Leeds Law School. Welcome to the video, Professor Cummins. How are you doing?
Thank you, Manish. Very well.
Recently, I just got to know that now IACCM is World Commerce and Contracting. So we'd like to have a few introductory words for it.
Absolutely, yes. It's an exciting change. It's reflective, Manish, of the growing mission and ambition of the association. We started off 21 years ago, really as a bit of a voice in the wilderness, in an era when there was no focus on commercial and contract management, certainly not at least in the commercial sector. And certainly not on any worldwide basis. So the forces of globalization were driving this need for more coherence and more discipline in contracts and commercial management, better intelligence, better training. So our origins were very much as a professional association, bringing together the people who were performing those roles, equipping them with a more consistent body of knowledge and certification standards. But as the years have gone by, and we do not only that, but we're also far more involved now in broader standard setting as organizations struggle with the intrinsic complexity, for example, of contracts, which are all written differently, using different words, different language, often to mean just the same thing, but even defying a lot of the tools of artificial intelligence and machine learning because of the embedded complexity that we've introduced into contracting activities. As the association now moves forward, we are looking much more at that engagement with standard setting bodies, whether it's people like WTO, OECD, or government bodies, where our support is increasingly sought and our research is increasingly of value in increasing the quality, the integrity of trading relationships, and the greater delivery of economic and social value.
Awesome. On that note, I want to extend my good wishes to you. And this is one field where there is a bit of a vacuum in the contract management, that there is a bit of an empty space where your organization can fit in as a standard setting body, as an academic think tank. And I really wish all the best on this new development and for second stage of the journey of IACCM and now WCC.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, so coming to the question, one of the first question I want to ask, that contracts are generally considered as a very adversarial information flow document, but very adversarial kind of a document. So whether, do you think the adversarial approach is good or collaborative approach is better?
Well, what I think, Manish, is that a contract is a product. It is an artifact. It is generated out of a process, or at least it should be. Yes. And one of the big challenges I think we have with contracts is that it is a product with an undefined purpose. It's very interesting when you think about trying to bring products to market and not really understanding what market they're being used in. But that too often is the way that we are, particularly with our template-based approach, where contracts are, as you say, often used much more as risk transfer instruments rather than thoughtful relationship building and performance enhancing instruments. The core purpose of a contract is economic. We get into contracts for the purpose of economic gain for both parties.
Yes.
Yet that is often something that's lost sight of. And we also need to be far more thoughtful about who we're having a relationship with and how the contract can be a helpful tool to ensure risks are managed well, to oversee issues of compliance, to oversee issues of performance. I've just been talking actually with somebody else in Canada about contracts and social value. And if you think about the contract, if, for example, I'm IBM, perhaps contracting with Walmart, it's a very different experience than if I am a big Canadian corporation that perhaps is contracting with an Aboriginal tribe.
Yes.
Um, but my contract probably is not reflective of that difference.
Okay.
And I'm seeking to impose onerous terms into an area where I'm actually trying to create social value and social inclusion. We do need to be far more thoughtful about the counterparties, about the people who need to use contracts, and we need to design them accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean that every contract is different, but it does mean that we need to employ much more intelligent segmentation to know when is it appropriate to perhaps have to deal with a more adversarial risk transfer style versus, at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps much more of a partnership or a collaborative form of relationship. There is no one-size-fits-all answer here.
You have, Tim, you have given me an agenda for my next interview with you. The next interview would be on the different types of contracting and kind of approaches to take, like in the what you said, that for social contracts and like top two, something like two giants like IBM and Walmart. They are, so how are they different? But like in this interview, what I want to say, ask that in general corporate contracts, in general enterprise level contracts, uh, is adversarial school of thinking is fine, or collaborative, like in your example of IBM and Walmart?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I think still the focus of much of the negotiation of contracts and the predominant terms in contracts tend to be about organizations trying to protect themselves. And that does tend to lead to a more adversarial model. Now, it doesn't mean that all of them are adversarial, and some companies obviously are more balanced than others. But I think it is certainly true to say still that in the B2B contracting space, a somewhat adversarial style is still relatively normal.
I remember our conversation some time back. You said that the contracts in itself are documents designed to be applicable in or answerable in a court of law. So probably something which is answerable in a court of law kind of drives people to become more machinistic, or like more, is that?
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, is what influences the typical design and structure of a contract, because it is being designed with the assumption that a possible user of this contract could be, you know, a prosecuting or defense attorney in litigation. I mean, the reality is, of course, that that is a minuscule proportion of contracts
Absolutely.
that is up there.
Absolutely.
So we are, unfortunately, often designing for the wrong user.
So less than 1% of the contracts actually end up in court of law. Uh, we have many forums before that. First a negotiation, then arbitration, and then goes litigation. But anyway, so on that note, I'll come on your another favorite point, which I've heard from you, is the agile and collaborative contracting. Would you like to say something on that? Like IACCM always, like now WCC advocates agile
Yeah,
contracting.
well, you know, I think, Manish, the COVID-19 has in many ways accelerated that debate. It has really strongly emphasized the uncertainty and the volatility in which we operate and in which our trading relationships operate. And that was a realization, I think, that had been growing over recent years, the appreciation that actually too often contracts created a level of rigidity. They didn't really provide answers when it came to how do we deal with changing circumstances and conditions.
True.
So as you begin to look at certainly longer term agreements, and of course, if this is a pure commodity transaction, then the likelihood of substantial change is often much lower.
Yes.
But as soon as you get into a longer term relationship, even if that is for the supply of commodities, then the probability of significant change is significant. And I think, COVID has emphasized the extent to which many contracts today don't have the mechanisms in place to actually generate the right conversations to manage those volatile market conditions. So we are seeing some shift in where the emphasis of negotiation is occurring, with organizations realizing that they need to perhaps be more precise around how change will be managed, around topics like rights of delay or the right to change payment terms. These are all things that really came to the fore with the COVID-19 crisis, and companies found that their contracts didn't equip them to resolve those issues quickly. So does that take us to collaborative and agile? It does. It begins at least to open the door to the understanding that we need to build more provisions into the contract on how will we work together in these uncertain times to better manage changes, the need for adaptability, and to deal with uncertainty. And the more uncertainty we face, the more, of course, we're likely to need to use agile forms of contract, which will perhaps be more milestone-based rather than trying to set in stone something where we know there is a high degree of uncertainty about its achievability.
So you are flowing from the first question, like you are kind of gravitating towards the collaborative approach by using the word agile as opposed to the adversarial approach.
Well, I think agile is probably at the end of a chain. And as I said, the need for agile forms of agreement does depend a lot on uncertainty analysis of organizations, but we should still build some agile provisions into any contract that's got a longer duration, because one thing we can be pretty sure of is that whatever we think we wanted today is probably not what we're going to be wanting 6 months from now. So how are we going to deal with that change in a way that is not confrontational? What are the forums we need to build in? What is the reporting we need to build in? And, how do we build in appropriate escalation and information procedures? How do we build our contracts and supporting systems so that we perhaps get earlier warning of the need for change or of emergent risk, so that we can work together to mitigate the risk, not to turn it into a source of disagreement and dispute?
Cool. Uh, okay. I have my next question is that I am negotiating a contract and I negotiated it for 6 months, and the contract I negotiated for 5 months or 1 year. How do you calculate the cost of contract management? Like I have a team of 10 people working on a contract, or how do you, like I have this contract, this thicker contract I negotiated 200 pages. How do you calculate like the return on investment on any contract negotiation activity?
Yeah, yeah. So contract economics is another of our big focus areas. We actually have a summit next week where we have a quite significant workshop looking at contract economics, and the data we're managing to establish on all that is growing all the time. There are many features of, as I said at the beginning, contracts are in many ways a product. So there is a cost associated with that product, but at different phases. There's a cost in the design of the product, there's a cost in the implementation of that product, and there's a cost in the ongoing operation of the product. So we really need to look at it from those three distinct dimensions, because of course, if our initial contract design is not good, then the probability is we're going to have a high downstream cost associated with the management of that instrument.
Absolutely. The
So,
dispute resolution. Yeah, go ahead.
you know, we really do need this life cycle view of the economics. Now, in terms of the contract production costs, we know that as soon as you get into any form of negotiation, costs obviously begin to increase.
Yes.
And, you know, I forget the exact numbers, Manish, but I think last time we looked at it, even the simplest negotiation has an average cost of about $6,000. As soon as you get up to any medium level of negotiation, you're looking at least 25,000. And if you're into complex agreements, well, the price tag there starts at about 50,000 and can go into the millions.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the ways we are looking at this, and we'll in fact be issuing some reports later this year, is in the context of thinking about the contracting life cycle and where are the major friction points, because of course it is those friction points that are indicative of cost. So really trying to think through, you know, the frequency of a claim or a dispute, the frequency of disagreement because the invoices are wrong, the frequency with which we do get stuck on negotiation or need to renegotiate. All of these are embedded elements of
Yes,
economic cost.
absolutely. And to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream that one day I'll get to see a model where I'll understand or get to know that this much of negotiation is what is required. Like there is nothing like this is the best contract. You keep on negotiating. You keep on negotiating for 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. Are you having the best contract? Probably never. So where to stop is the key. But okay. Another question I want to ask that as far as the performance-based contracts are there, because now, especially in these times, people are asking for performance-based contracts. So do you have anything like the best models for performance-based, like in the TNM or fixed bid contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges with performance-based, as also in fact with outcome-based contracts, is really having clarity over what it is you are trying to achieve, and where many of these things tend to go wrong is the performance indicators. You know, we all know about KPIs,
Yes,
and you know, I think organizations really struggle with what are the right drivers of performance and what is it that they really need to monitor as key indicators. One of the consequences of that is that often organizations will input far too many performance indicators. So one of the things that tends to go wrong is that we try and measure far too many things. And that's probably with the focus on you know, governance committees and review committees that organizations have today. I think that situation often is becoming worse, where every group has its own view of what the indicators should be. So we finish up with too many indicators. Often they are contradictory or confusing. They create and generate a mountain of workload just in generating the data and then consuming it, absorbing it, reviewing it, discussing it. And the other big challenge is that even if you have an appropriate set of performance indicators, they usually are going to change over time.
yes,
So as a project or a program proceeds, the nature of what you maybe need to be measuring also changes. And all too often, that ongoing review and update is not undertaken. So I think that is probably the most critical area as we look at performance-based and as I said, also, of course, keeping our eyes on what exactly is it we're trying to achieve. And as that changes and matures, recognizing our need to alter some of those performance parameters. A good performance-based contract is going to have very proactive review and data exchange, and
In order
interestingly,
to measure, yeah,
yeah,
you keep a close tab at things. Okay, another, like my second last question, if I may say, is that in bigger enterprise relationships, do you advocate the concept of negotiating the boilerplate in one side and then keep on having small statement of works how, like, often the tricky points are limitation of liability, indemnity, IP rights, property rights, and 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 yeah, more or less like this. So, do you think that negotiating these contentious points in a boilerplate agreement on the payment terms, IP, limitation of liability, and things like that is good, or every time we should have a new contract? What do you think?
yeah, and I think business efficiency is going to continue to drive us to that idea at the boilerplate. Um, and I think as well, I think two things. I think one, often in longer term relationships, to be honest, a lot of that boilerplate becomes pretty irrelevant and invisible over time, because, of course, most of the boilerplate is really concerned with a lot of it is what happens when things go wrong.
Yes, yes,
um, so if things don't tend to go wrong, or if we're working effectively together to keep things on track, it is relatively unusual that you will necessarily need to go back to those provisions.
yes,
So I do recognize that efficiency is likely to keep it much the way it is. Having said that, I do think we need to understand that certainly in the early stages of a relationship, the boilerplate can set the wrong tone and can constrain the, if you like, the sort of commitment of the counterparty. It has an impact on the perception of fairness and ease of doing business. And I do think we're going to see through better systems, we are likely to see more intelligent use of contract terms so that perhaps we have embedded alternatives that are more reflective of a particular situation. So, for example, do I need onerous indemnities on every occasion? Well, quite
yes,
clearly I don't. And the
yes,
problem with boilerplate is that a boilerplate will always be designed for the worst case scenarios.
yes.
And the worst case scenarios
Ends up
are
in court.
only typically applicable in a relatively small proportion of the overall contracts that you're forming. So it is very much really a hammer to crack a nut. And I think, I do think we're going to see more business intelligence starting to get deployed. We're already seeing a move away to some extent from the rigidity of templates, much more towards intelligent clause libraries, where you can build content that is appropriate to the relationship you're forming. And, next time, if it's a more complicated one, it needs to pull in a slight variant of that clause, it can do it. But it's so automated and so limited in its labor input, we can begin to develop that more flexible model.
In fact, artificial intelligence is also coming now in contract negotiation space, where certain boilerplates can be dealt with AI algorithms and things like that. I know at the end of day, the human supremacy is the highest, but yeah, AI is also venturing into this.
Yes, I
Uh,
mean, I think at the moment for most organizations, it's at quite rudimentary stage, to be quite honest.
Yes.
Most of them are still struggling to actually implement an enterprise contract lifecycle management system, let alone actually deploy advanced AI or machine learning techniques. But
Yes.
absolutely that potential is there in front of us.
My last point, Professor Cummins, is that you have been associated with academia also. So, what do you think? Like, I did my MBA, so I wasn't like exposed to the contract management thing. Like, do you see the role of universities and think tanks like WCC, like erstwhile IACCM, in forming up and shaping up the workforce, making university courses, or maybe at some point of time some degree level things for the
Yeah.
contract management?
Yeah, I think, commercial and contract management have struggled to gain real focus because they are not an easy fit for the traditional academic world. The academic world, rather like the business world, is defined by much more segmented disciplines. You are a lawyer, you are a doctor, you are a project manager, you are a supply chain expert, you are an economist. And of course, that's also reflected in the way that organizational data is structured as well. Most of the applications that have been embedded are functional applications. There are some to support procurement, some to support legal, some to support finance. So where we have the challenge with contracts and commercial management is that this is very much an interdisciplinary discipline.
Yes,
Actually, contracts and contract management are about making sense of all the different stakeholder perspectives, trying to reconcile them and bring them together in this singular product, the contract, and then manage it across, again, a complex bed of stakeholders who are internal, they're the counterparty, they're also the tax authorities, the regulatory
the
authorities,
government, yeah.
range of stakeholders who have an interest in that contract is phenomenal, which makes it, it gives you an understanding of why it is so difficult, but also why it's been difficult to teach, because universities and business schools have not historically been good at that cross-disciplinary integration and
Definitely.
collaboration. That's beginning to change. Universities and business schools are, like businesses themselves, recognizing the need to bring all these specialisms together and somehow make them coherent. And much of that coherence comes through commercial and contract management thinking. The program that I've been developing at University of Leeds is a collaborative activity between the law school and multiple disciplines within the business school, as well as economists and civil engineers and others. So I think we're reaching a new and exciting era of recognition, and technology in many ways is the thing that's making that new thinking possible.
I see a wonderful challenge, a huge body of challenge, and on that note, I can say the future is going to be even more interesting, more combative in this field. Lots to learn, and yeah, I extend my good wishes to you and to enrich this field of contract management. Professor Cummins, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and such an erudite experience having a discussion with you. I hope my viewers also find it extremely wonderful. Thank you for your time, Professor.
Thank you, Manish. We'll look forward to talking to you again. Goodbye.